Welcome back to your weekly dose of encouragement on the Unashamedly You podcast. As we step into the month of February, love is everywhere. Valentine's decorations, date nights, heart shaped everything. But this season really is not just about flowers and chocolate, it truly is about relationships. So this month, we are going to lean into conversations that matter. Focused on marriage, friendships, family, healing, communication, and the real work that it takes to build those lasting connections. Healthy relationships, we all know, do not happen by accident, but happen on purpose. So, we want to take this month to focus on that. So, whether you are married, single, dating, widowed, rebuilding, or just simply wanting to grow in the relationships that God has placed in your life, then this month's podcast are all for you. My prayer is that every single episode encourages you and challenges you, gives you some practical ways to love deeper, communicate better, and to show up intentionally for the people that matter most, because that truly is what it's all about. Hello, and welcome to the Unashamedly You podcast, a space to enlighten, encourage, and empower you to go out and unashamedly be who God is calling you to be. I am your host, Jamie Herndon. I pray you hear less of me and more of Him as you listen to today's episode. Let's grow together. This is the start of our Valentine's sessions for the month of February, and today's guest has actually been sent to me by several of you listeners to get her on to share her story. And I just could not think of someone better to start us off for this month. Abigail Peterson, welcome to the Unashamedly You podcast. It's such an honor to have you here to share your journey and your heart with all of us today. And if you'll start off by just introducing yourself to us.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation to share my story and to hopefully just be a blessing to someone. So, as I said, my name's Abigail Peterson, and I am from Las Vegas, Nevada, and I am a PK. My parents started their first work in Spokane, Washington, where I was born, and then a second work in Orlando, Florida, and then finally back here where they initially started in the early years of their marriage in Las Vegas, Nevada. So I've been able to be a part of their ministry and be a help to our local assembly here. I am a mom to 3 kids. My oldest son is 24 and he's married, and I have 2 grandbabies. So, my first grandson is 19 months, and then I have a new granddaughter that is 5.5 months. So, that is an exciting journey. Everything they say about being a grandparent is true. I love them. I love to play. I love to have all the fun, and then I love to send them home with their parents. So it's true, and then my daughter is, 18 years old, and then my youngest son is 16 years old. And, I was married for 26 years, and, we met when we were just young, even less than teenagers, 12 and 13 years old.
That's a fun journey. My husband and I met, we were really young, way younger whenever we met, but we started liking each other when we were 14 and 15. So that's always fun because you kind of literally grow up together.
Yes, absolutely, and especially when you're in a youth group together and you get to, you watch each other grow and you watch each other, sometimes like other people.
Yes, I agree with that because we were in the same youth group, but we also went to the same school. And then our biology class was at the same time. Like I had biology when he was having study hall or vice versa, but it was in the same classroom. And He would always save me a seat for whenever I was coming in there, and so that's whenever we really knew we liked each other. Fun times. So,
Yes.
can you share a little of your story? Go back to the very beginning of your journey and then lead up to what has brought you here and where you are today.
All right. So we were friends and we ended up falling in love. And so we got married. I was 18 and he was 19. And we very quickly decided to start a family. So our first child was born in 2000. And it was a very what I would consider a typical pregnancy. And being it wasn't my first pregnancy, I didn't really have anything to compare it to. And so everything appeared normal. Everything came normal up in my blood work. All my ultrasounds seemed normal. We were told it was supposed to be a girl. And again, this would have been back in 1999 and 2000. So things were a little bit different than they are now. And I ended up having to have an emergency C-section. And when all I remember was when our baby was delivered, that they said it's a boy. And I was so confused because we had planned for a girl. So the room was pink and we had all the frilly dresses and we had the pink blankets. And I just thought to myself, what? Like, I'm going to have to take all this stuff back. And the reality is that the second part that I will never forget was just the silence that was in the room. And that silence also was no baby crying. And it would be a few hours later, and we would find out that our baby was born with a genetic um, problem called trisomy 18. And it's also known as Edwards syndrome. We had no idea. And again, the tests never revealed anything at that particular time. And trisomy 18 is very frequently, more often than not, fatal. And so he had our little boy, his name was Marcus. He had multiple anomalies. And the biggest issue being he had an AVM in his brain. And so when you think about club feet and you think about holes in hearts, you think about things that can possibly be fixed. But the AVM in his brain could not be fixed. And so we had to go through the process of having him officially diagnosed with a geneticist. And then we had to make the decision to have him removed from life support. And so he was alive for 45 hours. And I was 20 and my husband was 21. So that was the very first time in my perfect princess little life, because up until that part of my life, I had lived this charming life, a wonderful childhood, wonderful parents and siblings. And then suddenly at 20 years old, I was faced with something that no parent ever wants to face, and especially your first child that you wanted so desperately. And my husband and I, we would often look at each other and just say, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And, you know, you deal with grief the best way that you know how. There is no guidebook. There is no manual. As many books as there are out there on grief, everybody grieves differently. And my brother and his wife had just had a baby 10 days before. And I remember my brother and my sister-in-law feeling very awkward. They didn't know what to do with their baby. And I just told them, I said, it's not your guys' fault. It's not your fault. This is something that they determined was what they call a fluke in nature. There was nothing I did. Jeremy and I were not carriers. It was just a random thing. And I just wanted them to know, even in my own grief, that their baby was I still wanted to celebrate her. And I still wanted, I didn't want them to feel any awkwardness when it wasn't anything that they had to do with. And so time went on, and the next year we had our oldest son, and you can imagine how joyful that was. That was, so exciting, nerve-wracking, but such a blessing. And after that, I said, okay, I've had two babies back to back. I need a little bit of a break. And I had been going to school to be a teacher. And so spent the next 3 years finishing getting my degree and just building what all young couples do, building your life together, and we had this, perfect little boy, and, I graduated from college, and again, I was feeling like I was getting my perfect little princess life back, you know, rebounding from the tragedy and was looking forward, and my mom and dad had been married almost 40 years and lived a beautiful, godly marriage. And I wanted that for myself, and I wanted that for my siblings. My mom got sick, and I just happened to be the one that took her to the hospital. And we didn't think it was anything. We thought it was going to be a gallbladder issue, if anything. And we were there for hours. And it ended up that night, the emergency room doctor came in and he was asking her all these questions. And I was irritated because I'd already answered these questions. My mom had already answered these questions. And um, in my in my frustration, I said to him, can you just tell us, And he said, "Well, I'm sorry to inform you, but you have liver cancer and there's nothing we can do. See your primary on Monday." And this was December 24th. And so it was just very devastating, you can imagine. And there is really no way to give anybody that information other than to just tell them. There's no soft way. But we were obviously devastated and immediately called, the rest of our family and was trying to figure out how to navigate that. And my mom, throughout that whole entire time, was just filled with faith and just said, "I believe the Lord can heal me. And I know God can heal me." And so we believed and that God was going to heal her. And she decided there were some treatments that she had done, and then there were some other treatments that she declined. And that was how she chose. And she had, it was her decision to make. And one of the beautiful things that came out of my mom's illness was I got a chance to be with her every day and we would walk and we had so many wonderful conversations about living for God. And in the short amount of time that I had with her, 3.5 months, she just gave me words of wisdom that are still with me today. And it ended up that God healed her, but not how we wanted him to. We wanted her to be healed in this life, but he healed her where there's no more pain and no more sorrow. And he healed her completely with a new body. And that was very devastating to our family. But at the same time, my dad had always preached, if we believe what we say we believe, because she's in a better place. She's in the presence of our Lord, and there is no pain and no sorrow. And I'm just so grateful for the godly examples she set in our life. And I'm so thankful, just so thankful for that. And I wish I could say that that was the end of my tragedy. And I wish I could say that I've just lived that princess perfect life that I always imagined. But the rain falls on the just and the unjust, and life is not perfect. And the next month, I found out I was pregnant. And we were so excited because we felt like, wow, this is a rainbow in our storm of life. And it ended up I was pregnant with twins, which was again a double blessing. And we were so excited. And, just believing God and just knowing that God is so good, even in spite of tragedy and even in spite of death here on earth. God is still good. A few months later, we found out I was I think I was close to 4 months pregnant. And my water ended up breaking. And I went to, of course, the doctor in the hospital, and they said, "Well, this is really unusual because only one baby has fluid and the other baby doesn't." And this would have been in 2005. And so I went through all these different experimental treatments where they tried to level out my fluids and they tried to, um, do anything they could to they didn't even know what to call it. At first, they thought one of our babies didn't have kidneys. And then they said it could be twin to twin transfusion or number three, we don't know. And it ended up being number three, we don't know. I went every single week to all my appointments. I followed everything they asked me to do. And my perinatologist, he said, I don't know where you go to church. I don't know what you do, but all I know is that is God has his hand in this because I have never seen this before. And I ended up going from 14 weeks to 28 weeks. And both babies, they call it concordant growth, were almost identical in growth. And that is not what the textbooks say. But I ended up getting a sepsis infection when I was 28 weeks pregnant. And I ended up having to deliver the babies. And they were born at 2 pounds, 6 ounces and 2 pounds, 7 ounces, two little boys, fraternal boys. And again, in my naivety, I thought that babies just stay in the hospital when they're premature and they come home after a few months. I didn't realize that there's so many complications with premature babies. And since my boys already had some issues with my water breaking early, I didn't know. I didn't know. And I remember my perinatologist saying, "Well, I'm hoping to get one healthy baby and one healthy mom out of this." And I was so angry. And I was like, "What do you mean? I have two babies and I want both of them." And both of the boys ended up getting grade 4 brain bleeds, which are very devastating to premature babies before 30 weeks. And so our first baby that was born, baby A, Landon, he was taken off of life support when he was 5 days old due to just multitude of issues with his lungs because he was the baby that didn't have enough fluid. And then our second baby, Carson, baby B, he passed away at 6 days old. So again, I will never forget going to church following that tragedy and just looking around, and the verse came to me, I will bless the Lord at all times, and his praise shall continually be in my mouth. And I thought about that and I prayed about it, and I couldn't blame God. I don't believe God punishes people, and I believe God's a just God and he's a good God, and he's still worthy to be praised, even in tragedy, even in tragedy. And so I I lifted my arms in church and I prayed through the pain and through the trauma yet again, because I will bless the Lord at all times, and his praise shall continually be in my mouth. And God wrapped his arms around our family and gave me peace and gave me comfort. And it was in those times that there was reassurance that God would continue to see us through. And he did. And after at this time we had 4 boys, if you're counting. Our first baby, and then our second son, and then our 2 twin little boys. So I thought, I'll never have a girl. I've had 4 boys. I don't think it's my husband was one of 7 boys, so I just didn't think it was gonna be in our cards. But I ended up expecting again, and it was a girl. And so God just blessed us, and our daughter Mariah was born, and it was it was just again another example of how God is a rewarder of them who diligently seek him. And I'm just so thankful. I'm so thankful for her life. And I'm so thankful that God brought her, gave her to us and allowed us to be her parents. And 2 years after that, we ended our family. We closed out our family with the bookend boy. And so we have, of our living children, we have two boys and a girl. And so for the next 15 years, we just put our efforts into supporting our church and doing what we could to further the gospel. And we taught our kids to be faithful to church and to give and to be servants and to learn how to serve other people and to learn how to love other people and to learn how to do whatever you can to see the work of God come to move forward. And I didn't share the part about, I've always been in a small church. We've always had a smaller church. And so there's a lot to be done in a small church because while there's many jobs, there's few people to do them. So you have to learn to be the bathroom cleaner and lead the songs and pick up the trash. You have to learn to do it all. And so we really worked with our kids to learn how to not only live for God, but to work for Him as well. And so that brings me to December 28th of 2024. So it's been a little over 13 months um, since another tragedy in my life. And that was that I have to stop here and say that a few months before, so the summer of 2024, I had heard about Bishop Holmes' teaching on the 52-day fast. And we had just gone through something as a church body. And my husband and I were really trying to encourage those around us and to see, what more can we do? Where, let's move to the next level, so to speak. And so I had purchased, my daughter had went to Peak. And so I asked her, grab those books, Bishop Holmes' book when you're there, the 52-day fast book. And so she did. She brought it home, and my husband and I read it and were very encouraged. And we decided that in the end of July, so right after she got back from Peak, we decided that we were going to go on a 52-day fast. And we did. And I gave up social media, and he gave up this game that he played on his phone. And so, and it was just such a blessing. While we didn't see an instant answer to our prayer, we saw that God was working. And so we did it again. We started in September again, and we did another fast. And the night that I'm speaking of, December 28th, I had purchased the second book. And I know there's multiple versions out now, but it was book 2. It was the second book. And I was sitting on the chair, and my husband was laying on the couch. And this was right before the new year. And we were going to, as a church, go on a 52-day fast. And so my husband and I was reading him some of the testimonies out of there. And we were talking about what we were going to give up because we had given up social media. I had done plain water because I hate plain water, and I always add in the little packets. So my husband had given up iced tea. He loves sweet tea, so he'd given that up. So we were talking like, well, what is left to give up? So we were chatting about those things, and we ended up, deciding, well, we've got to come up with something before, it gets presented to the church. And that night, he was tragically shot and killed. And as I said, I wish, and I know wishes are not true, but I wish it wasn't my story. I wish it wasn't my story. I wish that it I don't even wish it was somebody else's story. I just wish it wasn't real, but it is. It is real, and my husband was tragically killed on that night, and I became a widow at 44 years old. I became a widow at 44 years old, being married for 26 years. All I had ever known from the time I was 18 until this time was building a life with him and having our kids and going through so much tragedy together. And this time I would have to walk that road alone. And I was, of course, devastated. And I was full of pain and full of sadness of what does my future look like now? You feel like you have no future. You don't know what your next steps look like. You don't know what all the thoughts come to your mind. But always in the forefront of my mind was I will bless the Lord at all times, and his praise shall continually be in my mouth. And my husband, like I said, he was passed away on Saturday night. And well, I wasn't at church on Sunday due to lots of things I'm sure everyone can understand. But that Wednesday night, I walked into church and my husband was the song leader, and his handprint is everywhere in our church building. He did the Venetian plaster. He took care of all the lights. He took care of the sound equipment. He took care of all the little things. And I walked in that night, and he wasn't going to be there to lead songs. And he wasn't there to fix the one ballast in the light that's flickering in the back. But when the music came on, I had to lift my hands and I had to worship a God who is still worthy to be worshiped in spite of tragedy and in spite of all the bad things that you think can happen. He's still worthy to be praised, and he's still worthy of my love and my devotion to him, because where would I be without him? Where would I be without him? And the next few months were, I, I know some people say after a tragedy, it seems like a blur, but I can remember so many things following, you know, all the funeral and all the things that go along with it. And then you learn when you're walking in widowhood, you learn, oh, well, I guess I have to learn how to um, take the car to the shop. And I have to learn how to make sure that, I mean, this is going to sound very pampered, but my husband put all the diesel in my car. I didn't have to do it. I would just say, "Oh, I'm low," or he would get in my car and say, "Oh, I went and filled up your car today." So all of a sudden, I had to do those things. And all of a sudden, I had to, things that we each had a role in doing. His role was now, he wasn't there to fill that role. He wasn't there to help me. He wasn't there to comfort me. He wasn't there to speak words of wisdom. And so I had to learn to depend upon the Lord even more. And I remember Brother Frost and Brother Lawrence were at my Brother Frost um, was the speaker at my husband's funeral, and both Brother Frost and Brother Lawrence at different times on the same day came to me and said, "We know you have faith. We see your faith. We like many funerals, you have slideshows. And in the slideshow was pictures of, Jeremy and I um, going, on different trips and doing different things and doing outreach. And they said, we see the faith that you had, but now you have to trust. And faith and trust are very different. And I've had to learn that over the last year, that faith and trust are very different. And it's hard to trust when you cannot see. It's hard to trust when you don't know what those next steps look like and what those next few months look like. But I've held on to those words over the last 13 months. And I've just said, Lord, I will trust you and lean not on my own understanding. Now, I also want to say, though, while this sounds very spiritual, I will have to also say there have been times that I have not been strong. There have been times where I've fell apart and I've cried and I've said, Lord, why? And I often listen to, I found comfort in listening to other widows' stories and widowers' stories and how they have trusted God. And sometimes there are people that say, well, don't question God. And I can't say that I'm demanding an answer from God because I'm not. But sometimes I think, well, God, I've been faithful. I've come to church. I've given my best. I've worked for you. But then that same verse comes back to me. I will bless the Lord at all times. There is no caveat in that scripture that says when all is going well, when you're having a good day, when you have everything you ever hoped and dreamed. There is no caveat. It says, I will bless the Lord at all times. And that includes in death.
You saying that, trusting God and having faith they really are two totally different things. You can have faith that something is gonna happen, but
Abs-
when you trust him, that means even if it doesn't happen, even if I'm having all this faith in God and it's not his will, it's not gonna work. He's not gonna do it. It's not gonna be in our plan and in our mind and what we have. Sometimes we have faith for him to do what we want him to do.
yes. Yes.
But then we have to trust that even though we have enough faith that he can do it, we have to trust that it's not always his plan to do it that way.
That's right. And he's guiding our steps. I've prayed so many times over the last 13 months, Lord, you are the author and the finisher of my faith, and you write my story. And again, as I shared, I feel like there's been times in my life I've wanted to grab the pen and I wanted to say, let me write it. I don't like this part of the story, but he is the author and he will be the finisher of my story. And I really do want him to have the pen and he can make a beautiful, I feel like I'm in a new book now. We talk about chapters of your life and seasons of your life. And I feel like I'm not even in the same book. I'm in a whole new book. But I lend the pen to the master and I let him take over. And I want him to write my story.
In all of the grief that you've talked about, all of it's every single part of your story and the grief that you share seems unimaginable. It's those every one of them are situations where you're looking at it, you're like, "I cannot imagine going through that." Your first baby, you're like, I can't imagine." And then your twins, it's like, "I can't imagine again." Then your mother and, every part of your story is like, "I just can't imagine that happening at any point," and for it to be over and over again, I know that your faith has had to feel shaken. and that your relationship with God has had to change through each season, but then especially in this season that you are in now, what is something that you can say that you're like, I went through this, but God showed up in a real way?
Throughout every situation, throughout every tragedy, throughout every death, God has shown up in some way, some form, through someone. I didn't share this part, but after the twins were born and after they passed away, my dad remarried. And all my brother and sister and I, we all three of us, we knew that our dad would remarry. It wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. But that particular year, 2005, my mom passed away in April. My twins passed away in November, and my dad remarried in December. So the emotions were just, it was immense. It was grief, but at the same time, I was happy for my dad and, my dad's new spouse, and but just overwhelming. But even in those times, God showed up. And I'll share this little story about um, after the twins had passed away and my dad remarried, I felt like I was just floating. I felt like I was a astronaut floating out in space with no tether. I didn't know what I was doing and what even my purpose was, all while still living for God. And so you can be in a season where you are not sure what your purpose is, but still live for God and still glorify Him and magnify Him. And I decided, I said, you know what? I'm going to go on a 3-day fast. And I told my husband, I said, don't feel obligated, but I don't even know what I'm looking for. I don't know. I don't have a specific prayer. I don't have an answer that I'm looking for. I don't really know what I'm looking for. But my mom, one of those little things, gems that she had taught me was that if you want to get God's attention, fast, pray and fast. And so I said, I don't know what else to do except for to fast. So I decided to do a 3-day fast. And at the time, we had service on Thursday nights. And so I told my husband, I said, okay, I'm going to fast Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So after church on Thursday night, that's going to be my last meal. So I remember after service, we went to Chili's. We went to Chili's to eat. And when we got home, now remember, this was 2005. So we all still had house phones then and answering machines. We came home and it was probably 10:30 and there was um, a, a message on our answering machine. So it was odd because all the people that we know and we regularly spend time with were at church with us. So why would we have somebody on the answering machine? And we played it. It was my son was going to a private little preschool at the time, and it was the ombudsman. And the ombudsman is generally a person who deals with conflict. So if there's parents that are not getting along, or you're not getting along with the teacher or the director, the ombudsman gets involved. And I thought, what in the world? Like, what did I do? I don't know. And she said, Abby, as soon as you get home, if you could call me. And I thought, it's 10:30 at night. Why would what did I do? So I called her and she said, Abby, I don't know if you know this, but I'm an Episcopal priest. And so I didn't know that. And she said, and tonight, she said, I have some parishioners in my church that just had twin boys, and one has already passed away, and one is most likely going to pass away. And she said, I I want to know what to say to them. I want to know what are some words of comfort that I can provide them. And immediately, I hadn't even started the fast. And immediately, I knew God heard me and God answered my prayer. Now, what was my question? What was my request? I don't know to this day. I do not know. I just knew immediately God had heard me. And the rest of the story is I did finish the fast. I did do my commitment of 3 days of fasting, but that mom and I ended up connecting and we ended up talking for many months. And we never met in person, which is so odd because we live in the same city. We never met in person, but we connected and shared, our feelings and thoughts on the loss of our children. And she introduced me to a website where I was able to memorialize my twins, and I wrote my whole story, and I gave essentially my life up until that point, which was very cathartic for me and something that I probably needed. And we never met in person. We've never talked since. The last conversation her and I had was her daughter was born on March 30th and my daughter was born on March 31st. But we've never met, we've never talked since then. But that was a milestone in my life where God came through and God showed himself without me ever knowing what I was asking for. And I say that because sometimes we don't know what we need. Sometimes we don't know what the answer is. Sometimes we don't even know what to pray. And that has happened to me many times over this last year is sometimes I don't even know what to pray. But God knows. And his word is true. And I've been reminded multiple times over the last 13 months that God cannot lie and his word does not lie. And if we trust him and we believe his word, he will see us through. That doesn't mean that I'm going to not have another tragedy. I pray that the Lord spares me from any more. I pray that God extends grace and mercy to me. But if he doesn't, he's still good. He's still good. And at my husband's funeral, my husband, you know, he I sing. I can't say I'm the greatest singer. I've not sang at big conferences, but my husband would always, he loved my singing. And so when we were planning his service, I looked at my family and I said, who do we have sing? And they all said, no, Dad would want you to sing. Dad would want you to sing. And so the song that we sang, and I had my kids join me, but was the goodness of God. Because all my life, he's been faithful. And all my life, he's been good. Regardless. And I know my husband felt that way until his final breath. All my life, you've been faithful. And all my life, you've been so, so good. And so God has met me in every tragedy, in every low part of my life. God has met me. And I will continue to trust him as he continues to guide my life.
Feel like I can't even follow up with questions. If anything, this podcast has just been like you were talking about, just saying, your perfect princess life. It just sometimes feels like that's what we deserve,
Yes.
is what we imagine our lives to be. And sometimes life isn't what we feel like we even just deserve, like just deserve to go get married and have a wonderful life until you're 90 years old.
Yes. And I think also when you live for God and when we're filled with the Holy Ghost, we feel very privileged. And I do. I feel very privileged that I know the truth and that I know that there's hope beyond this fleshly life. But God did not promise us perfection. God did not promise us a life without trouble. And that looks different for everybody. That looks, I know you're from a very large church and you can look around and you can see trouble in everyone's life. So God so just because we live for God, just because we work for him, just because we give our time and our talent and our energy to the work of God does not guarantee that we're going to live a life of perfection and a life that we imagine when we're little girls. But God is still faithful. God is still faithful. And I'm thankful. And my prayer now is, Lord, I just want keep me till the end, keep me till my dying breath. I want my final thoughts and my final utterances to be praise. I want it to be worship for the King, for the one who has kept me, the one who has, in spite of everything, given me hope. And my second prayer is, Lord, I want my kids and my grandkids to live for you. And their testimony, tragedy is a part of their testimony too. You know, their dad is gone. They didn't, um, they, they weren't a part of our early years where we lost. I mean, my oldest son was 4 when the twins passed away, so he does remember it. But my other 2 children were not a part of that. They've heard the stories. They've heard, their mom and dad testify of these things. But I pray that in whatever capacity this tragedy has affected them and has it been part of their story, that they will use tragedy and trauma to be their testimony, to be something that in 1 year, in 5 years, if the Lord tarries, for them to be able to stand up and say, I will bless the Lord at all times, and his praise shall continually be in my mouth. I don't need them to be doctors. I don't need them to be scientists. I don't need them to have the biggest house. I don't need them to have all the things. I just need them to have a love for God and a heart to praise him and for faith and hope and trust to keep them like it has kept me.
I was actually just talking to my husband this morning. Last night, we was Sunday night and we were at church and my kids were down front worshiping and praying. My girls, they got really good touch. There was another young lady that was down front and I was thinking about, that there's other girls that, that are my girls' age that I know, like, they have so much as far as the world is concerned. They'll always have so much, monetarily, those types of things. And there was another little girl that, was down there and she was praying with my kids, and she doesn't have so much. And I told my husband, I said, "She's in the ark of safety. And if she will stay in that ark, if I can keep my kids," I saw, with my kids down there, I thought, this is what really matters is if they're in this ark. All the things that the other children, may be afforded that's parents don't have them in this ark. I said their lives will never be as good as the ones that may not even have as much. They may not have the perfect home life. Their parents may not be great parents. You know, some of them may not have really parents to speak of at all. They may not have anything financially, but if they're in this ark, that's all that truly matters. Because in the ark is where you
Yes,
can go through the tragedies that you went through and you can stay focused and you can still live.
that's
You
right.
know, through some of the things you've been through, most people could not live through that without being on every sort of medication that you can imagine or, go into something else. You have to go through those things with something. But when you're going through it with God,
That's it.
he goes through it right there with you, and you can make it through. And if you can raise your children like you said, it doesn't matter. I could care less what my kids do in life. If they'll stay in this ark, it absolutely doesn't matter.
That's right.
What you become or what you do, it can be blessed if
You
you're in the ark.
it can, and I think when you go through tragedy, when it's dealing with death, I think that's what also gives me that sense of w what does really matter? What does really matter? Because when you go through the death of someone, and my husband was young, my husband was only 45, and you look around and you say, after someone dies, and I death is one of those topics nobody likes to talk about. It's a macabre topic. Nobody wants to talk about after somebody dies. But the reality is that after someone dies, their stuff is not useful to them anymore. Their thousands of dollars worth of clothes, their thousands of dollars worth of vehicles, none of that, they don't need that anymore. It doesn't matter anymore. And you look around, my husband was very into ATVs and fun guy stuff. I'm not into that. So what am I going to do with it now? It was important to him. I don't, I'm not going to go out and ride. I don't even know how to drive a truck and trailer, you know? And so when you put things into perspective and you think about, you know, it really is true. Only what's done for Christ shall last. Only what's done for Christ shall last. And while I'm not saying let's all live like poor people and live in hovels, I do believe that God does have a plan for us, and God does give us, he wants what's best for us. But I do think that going through tragedy and death has given me a perspective that what does matter? What what really matters? And what really matters is my soul and my children's soul and my grandchildren's souls and those around, and trying to reach the lost. And even in my tragedies, I've used this as an opportunity. Lord, use my pain for a purpose. Use whatever you can, all the broken pieces of me, all of the little fragments that to me seem unredeemable and unuseful. God can use them.
Going through such a deep loss and being a widow at such a young age, but I feel like whether, speaking to somebody that's grieving or married, what would you say about loving deeply and just forgiving freely and, not waiting to say what really matters most? What would you say to that?
I would say that all the cliches are true. Don't go to bed angry. Forgive more than you hold on to things. I would say don't sweat the small things. Those are all cliches that we hear and we see on, notebooks, and we see on printed things at Hobby Lobby, but it's true. It's true. You never expect, you know, to be a widow at a young age. I never intended, expected ever. I wasn't even a consideration. But when it did happen, I'm so grateful for the love that we had and the love that we shared, and that what is taught in the Bible is true, about, husbands love your wives as Christ loved the church. And I could say that my husband did. And, y- to say that there's perfect marriages, I think would be a lie, because I don't think there's any perfect. But I think when you let God be the head of your life and the head of your marriage and the head of your household, it really does lend itself to loving as the Bible speaks of love. And, you know, there's really, when you think about, or when I think about, the little things, the little idiosyncrasies, um, when your husband puts a cup on the counter after you've done all the dishes, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Sometimes, and for the young wives, I was once there and I used to make a big deal about it. Can't you just put your glass in the sink? Can't you just put your work boots here? Can't you just do this? And it's in the big scheme of things, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. And I I'm just so thankful that our lives revolved around the church and our lives were filled with a godly love. There wasn't there wasn't insecurity about what the world faces. A lot of marriages in the world, what they face, we didn't experience that because our lives were, you know, based on living for God. And I would just say, take those times to, if you are not if you are growing apart, and I've heard this, as a lot of us probably have, as you get older, you know, um, marriages tend to kind of grow apart and kind of, everybody after the kids leave home, and after our first son got married, I experienced a little bit of that empty nest. Now I still had 2 kids at home, but it is when your first child gets married and actually leaves your house, it's like, wow, they're starting their own life and you don't see them every day and you don't, they're no longer saying, "Hey mom, can you make this for dinner?" because now they have a wife that does that. And but I'm just so grateful that at during those times where I could have turned to somebody on social media because that's what it's turned to nowadays is, well, what does this expert say on social media? What does this person say? I'm glad that I just leaned on my husband and the sadness and the frustration and the even all of the parts. I just leaned on him. And I would say that wherever you're at in your marriage, have conversations, talk, all the small things. My husband, and I know this sounds corny, but my husband would say to me, "Well, I just love to hear you talk." Okay. And sometimes I didn't want to talk. I'm like, I've talked all day. I don't want to talk, but have those conversations. You'll never regret it. You'll never regret it. You'll never regret holding your husband's hand. You'll never regret going for a drive. You'll never regret those things. And sometimes and I hate to say this, but I just saw a clip of your pastor preaching somewhere, and he said that the robbery of praise, one of the things is busyness. And it was a very short clip, but that hit my heart because we live in such a fast paced society and we're always so busy. We're so busy. And I just think to myself, if we could just slow down and enjoy the little moments, because you'll never regret them. You'll never regret them. And, think about those. Is this really necessary? Can this wait till later? And as, young moms that have little kids, sometimes those can't wait. But, that's a season. That's just a season. And when you're out of that season, take time for your husband and give him those small moments.
It is true that busyness can rob you of so much, but we feel like that we can't stop. You feel like you can't slow down. But then you come to a time in a season that you're in and you think of how much really time that you probably had, and you're
Yes.
thankful for all the times that you took. In the midst of your healing, what has God allowed you to do in the doors that He's opened for you to help others that are walking through the same thing?
Over the last year, 13 months, I have looked around and I said, as a young person, I went to junior camps and senior camps and conventions and conferences. And as a married couple, I mean, 6 months before my husband passed away, we went to our good friend's. the Buxtons in Chula Vista, we went to their marriage conference. And there seems to be things for young people and marrieds and even, adult singles. And I know there are some churches that have teenagers, the seasoned citizens and their seasoned saints, I'm sorry, of the church. But yet I just looked around and I didn't see anything for the widows. And I started looking in the Bible and I went through every verse that mentioned a widow and how God has a special place for widows. And how in the day and age that we live in now, because of the connotation of death that's connected to it, sometimes we don't know what to do. We don't know what to say. We don't necessarily know how to interact, especially after somebody has just become a widow or widower. So I wanted to reach out to widows and widowers because I wanted to connect with them and I wanted to say, share your story with me. Oh, you too, you had those same feelings. Oh, how, what about this? As young moms, as teenagers, we all connect. Oh, well, what about this? What do you do when your baby's crying in the middle of the night? But yet there's doesn't seem to be that place for widows. And so I I just thought about it and I thought, Lord, if you can use me in my brokenness, if you can use the fragments, whatever you can use, Lord, use me. Wherever it is. I just I I don't want my trauma and my tragedy to define me to that place where I cannot be used. That I'm so lost in my own tragedy and in my own pain that I'm not usable. I believe that we all have probably experienced somebody that is so enveloped in their pain and in their sorrow and in what has happened in life. And life can be bitter, life can be sad, but there is hope. There is hope. And God has a plan for each of us. And my husband's life ended on December 28th, 2024. And the book of his life was closed, but mine is still open and I have a choice. I can I can lie around in that pain and I can refuse to move forward, or I can bless the Lord at all times and I can say, here I am, Lord, in my brokenness, with my fragments, with my pain, bring purpose to this. And that's what God has done. I ended up I thought about, well, should I, maybe I should start an Instagram page. And I thought, well, I know how that works because I'm involved in social media in another business that I have. And it brings out the keyboard warriors and people feel, confident behind the anonymity of a keyboard that they can say whatever they want and they can do a drive-by, you know, opinion and they don't even follow you. And I thought, that's not what I'm trying to do. And so I thought on it a couple more days and I talked to my sister about it. And I said, I think I want to start a podcast. I know a lot of widows. I know of widows and I know people who know widows who know widows. And I said, I would just love to reach out to them and let them know that they're not alone and let them know that that they're loved and that their story matters. And so I started a podcast and I called it The Business of Widows. And I know it sounds like an odd name, but in Acts 6, there was much discussion between the disciples about the Greek widows. And they said, well, who's going to help them? And so it was appointed, I believe it was 7 men that were appointed over the business of widows to help take care of them and to help serve them and make sure that they were taken care of. And so I thought it was very fitting that I would name it the business of widows because I just want to be a help and I just want to support and I just want to let those who have already been down this journey and those who come to this journey in the future to know that God still loves us and He still cares for us. And we have a place in the church and we have a place and a purpose, even in our pain. And so I started the podcast and I have reached out to several different widows, and there have been 5 so far that have graciously responded and been a part of my podcast. And we'll just see where the Lord takes it from here.
So exciting. I remember whenever you reached out and you're like, I think I want to start a podcast for widows that, you were a new widow at the time and you were thinking about that. And I remember telling you this because this is actually what happened with the Unashamedly You podcast. I feel like whenever God opens your eyes to a need and you see the need, that's whenever He's saying, here's a need in the church. I want you to fulfill this need. And, with Unashamedly You, I saw a need for, I'm like, I can go and get motivation all day long
Mhm.
from incredible women that have done incredible things.
Yes.
But I want motivation from apostolic women. I want someone
Yes.
speaking into my life that's got a word from God that says, you know what? I come against this mountain and this is how God removed it or how God allowed me to cross it or how God brought me through it. And I'm like, I'm longing for that. I'm longing for
Yes.
those stories and that encouragement. And with your podcast, I love that it's apostolic women that are saying, I didn't go get a book. I didn't get a self-help. I didn't go to this therapist, although I think that that's so important to find an apostolic
Mhm.
therapist as well. There's so many out there. But for them to come to your podcast and for you to have the words like you've had today, your story has been so encouraging, if not for anything else other than to just know it's not our place to write our story.
Mhm.
It's not God's will that our lives be perfect. Our bishop says it so often, man is few days and full
Of trouble.
of trouble. And he always says, if you're not going through something right now, hang on because you're
Mhm.
about to. You've
Amen.
either just come out of something or you're about to go into something or you're in the middle of something. It's one of those 3 things. It's never gonna be this, like you said, perfect princess life forever. It's not that's not how it is. You're gonna go through some things in life. There's gonna be some storms, but that's when God can show up. And you have spent this entire podcast saying, I've went through the storm. I've went through things, but God is faithful and I will bless the Lord at all times. That scripture means more to me now after hearing your story. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. It doesn't matter what I face or what I go through. It doesn't matter if it's fair or if it's unfair. It doesn't matter if I had faith for something different and it didn't happen. I'm going to bless the Lord at all times.
Amen. Amen.
Everything that you have said today has been such an encouragement and a blessing for I know every single person that listens to this podcast. What is one last thing that you would want to leave with all of us in the Unashamedly You community today?
Trust God. Trust God. And it doesn't matter what we're going through. It doesn't matter, if it's an unpaid bill. Doesn't matter if it's your child contracts an illness. Doesn't matter if it's the loss of a spouse. Trust God. God will see you through. He is the answer. He is the answer. There are a lot of things in our life, and especially in the day and age we live in, we have instantaneous information. You can type in grief and get pages and pages. You can use AI to, I know people who use that as their personal therapist. You can use any of that. But God's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And the same God that delivered Moses, and the same God that delivered Ruth, and the same God that delivered Paul and Silas is the same God that delivered me and has kept me. And he can do the same for you. Just trust. Just trust.
It's one thing for him to be the author of our faith, but it's another thing for him to be the finisher. Our
Yes.
bishop mentioned it recently by saying, he said, I've seen so many people go through so many trials and have faith and stick with God to be knocked out at the end.
Hmm.
It's one thing for him to be the author, but it's another thing whenever we say, you know what, he's going to be the finisher of my faith. He's going to
Yes.
finish the story for me. I'm not going to pick up the pen. I'm not going to get in the way, but I'm not just going to have faith, but I'm going to trust in God.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for sharing your heart, for being so open with all of us. You have definitely blessed me and blessed my life just by being a part of this podcast today. We're so grateful that you came on here and shared your story with all of us. We hope that you have a wonderful day. Thank you for listening to another episode on the Unashamedly You podcast. If this episode has spoke to you or blessed you in any way, be sure to share it with someone that you love and leave us a review. It helps so much for others to find the podcast and to know what we are about. We look forward to being with you next week as we continue conversations about relationships throughout this Valentine's season. I pray that you feel the love that you deserve all month long. Go be unashamedly you.